So, this week was a tough one. We had to say goodbye to our beloved golden retriever. A year ago, she had a slipped disc in her back, and that was so bad that both her back legs went lame. Back then we had an operation to have that fixed, and it was stressful on the dog, it was stressful on us, it was stressful on our wallets, but we did it. Just a couple weeks ago, she injured her back in a different position, same thing. It's a genetic disorder or disease that they have just weak backs and have issues with their discs. And she's getting up there in years. She was either 11 or 12, we're not quite sure, because she was a rescue dog, and rescue dogs they always sell as little puppies even if they're a little bit older, because people want puppies. Anyways, long story short, it got so bad that even with medication and various other things we've tried, it was just time. So this week we had to go put her down, unfortunately. Yeah, we still feel terrible about it, but at the end you have to do what's best for the pet or the dog, and as hard as it is for you, you have to put them first. And so yeah, that's done. It's still really strange. The place feels more, obviously empty, and she was super quiet, but you still obviously notice that she's not there. Because of that, I honestly didn't really feel like recording anything new. I'm sure you guys would understand that. So I thought it'd be a good chance to show you guys some footage that I've had on my computer for a while, and that is how I built my DJI FPV cinematic FPV drone. When I built it, it was just before Christmas last year, so I figured I'd show you guys that today. So before we jump in, if you haven't seen my first two DJI FPV kind of intro videos, then be sure to check them out. You can check out the first one up here in the corner, and the second one should be linked in the description of that one, so you can check those out. And that kind of gives you more of a context about this build and why I went with the choices that I went with and how everything works. A bunch of you guys still wanted to see the build video, so I figured, hey, it's a good time to post that. So enjoy. Alright, so we've gotten this far with the frame here. Looks pretty cool so far. It always looks much bigger in the pictures. Look at that, that is just insanely small. Of course we got the antennas here and the wiring harness, which we actually won't use because I believe with my flight controller we get our own. I added the DJI Air unit because we have to run the wire on this frame through here like this. And I've mounted the first motor halfway. Look at the size of these motors. This ain't no Phantom or Mavic 2 Pro motor. These things are ginormous. Should get some explosive performance out of these things. So I'm going to go ahead and mount 4 more motors, and then we'll start the electronics soon. I've got the frame pretty much done, the bottom section of it, of course. There's still this top plate that will go on later after the electronics are in, but I've got the frame put together as well as the motors mounted. Look how cool those look. I just used some electrical tape to tape the air unit on here because I had to install it to get this wire to go through down here, but that'll eventually come back here. So the next step is to install the electronics here in the middle. It's called the stack. We're going to put the electronic speed control all in one. It's a 4-in-1 actually, I'm sorry. The electronic speed control 4-in-1 is going to go here. Then we're going to solder the motor wires to it. That'll supply power to the motors. and the signal to tell them how fast to spin, etc. Then we're going to put these spacers on, and then the flight controller will go on top. So it'll be ESC, spacer, then flight controller. And if you're wondering what the ESC looks like, that would be like this. Ta-da! Looks pretty fancy, huh? And this is usually soldered really close or directly onto the ESC where you attach the battery, positive and minus cables. And this allows you to get smoother voltage and less spikes and that kind of stuff onto your sensitive electronics. And I bought a bigger one because bigger is better most of the time, but it doesn't really fit into the drone where I want to put it. Right through here. So the big one doesn't fit in here into this little hole. The little one does, but the little leads are so short that it won't reach. So anyways, this is the one that came with the ESC, so I'm hoping that it's good enough. And before I put it on, I'm going to test it, so that's what I wanted to show you guys real quick. So this marking here on the capacitor means it's the negative side. So I can take a multimeter. Let's see if I can get this to stick in here. It's pretty cool. That stuff is Loctite. It's Loctite brand. This kind of sticky stuff. If I find the packaging, I'll let you guys know. So the multimeter I'm going to set to ohm, which is down here. And it should be between, I don't know, 10K and whatever, what I read online. So I set it to 20K. And what you want it to see is to start low and then continue climbing up. That's how you know your capacitor is working. So I did this with the big one the other day. So can you guys see the readout here? Let's do this. So I'm going to attach the negative side first. Let's get these wires uncrossed. So the negative side first and then the positive side. Okay, see how it's climbing up? That means that this capacitor is working correctly. So this is what it looks like with the capacitor soldered on. And remember to stay hydrated. Okay, so now we add a little bit of this flux from the flux pin. Alright, so this ESC is prepped. Okay, so I've just pushed on the ESC onto the pins on the frame. And that looks like this. And next we're going to have to attach the motor wires to the ESC. So what we're going to do is take the 3 motor wires and attach them to the respective pads. Now you don't want to make these too short, but you also don't want them long like this. That looks kind of silly, and it gives the propellers a chance to cut your motor wires, and that's not ideal as well. So we're going to make them go somehow like this. So this motor goes here, these motor wires go onto these 3 pins, etc., etc. And the main leads will go here. I've cut the motor wires and I've stripped off the insulation. I twisted the strands, and now I'm going to pre-tin each motor wire. I'm going to apply heat from the bottom and then have the solder kind of get sucked in. That's the goal, at least. You know what? To keep the solder from splashing onto the ESC, I'm going to cover the ESC. That way you don't get any short circuits later. Short circuit surprises. Because they're not exactly that very cheap. There we go. Okay, so that motor is done. I'm going to pre-tin the rest of them and then continue on. Okay, so all the motor wires are tinned and I'm going to flux them all. Okay, it's time for the moment of truth. Well, not really, but I'm going to solder on the motor wires onto the ESC now. So we're going to protect the part of the ESC that is not being soldered. And here we go. Using these little almost medical type, not really medical, they're tweezers meant for this kind of work. I haven't had breakfast yet, so that's why I'm kind of shaky. All I've had is coffee. Okay. Okay, so we've got all 4 motors wired on to the ESC. Next up, I'm going to add the power lead here, and then I'm going to put the flight controller on top and figure out the wiring harness from the ESC to the flight controller. Now I've got the power leads on the battery leads soldered on here. Not a lot of room, and the grommet to have the wires come up to the top is here. So if you look at this plate, you see the grommet right there. So I had to kind of do this, and then I'll move both of the wires on this side of this standoff to get them to come up. And I'm hoping this holds. Alright. Next up, the flight controller. And here's the flight controller. Alright, so since I didn't choose a stack with ESC and flight controller built in, made for the DJI system, and I didn't do that because I wanted an ESC that has a higher amp rating than the standard 35 amp or whatever it comes with. If you buy one of those stacks, mine is rated for 55 amps. So since I didn't do that, I have to figure out the wiring schematic from the ESC to the flight controller. If you take a look at this diagram here, I kind of cobbled together all the PDF manuals and drew lines, and I went on the Facebook groups for the FPV kind of stuff, and I asked them to peer review my schematic, and it appears to be correct. So I've got this wiring harness here, come on, focus, with just the loose leads like this, but they already have the pins on them, and the cable came with these kind of jumper plugs, and so you have to figure out the order and then plug them in. So that's what I'm doing now. It comes with 2 cables in case you want to wire each thing on the flight controller. No thanks if I don't have to, or like this, and you can just make your own plug, and that's what I'm doing now. Okay, so since I'm going all out and I want as many features as possible on this drone, remember we've got the flight controller here, and onto this flight controller I have to wire the ESCs, which we took care of with making this cable harness. I double triple checked it, so that should be good to go. Then, since I'm not using the DJI air unit as my receiver, I have to add a receiver. And look at the size of this thing. This is ridiculous. Years ago when I was messing around with electronic RC airplanes, the receivers were way bigger than this. I mean, this is going to be a little challenge to solder. Wish I had a thinner tip on my soldering iron, so if you're getting a soldering iron, make sure you have a super thin tip. I mean, that just shocked me. It's super tiny. So we got the receiver, and then I wanted to add GPS, and this is the GPS chip, and I'll explain it in the future. This isn't like what we're used to on the DJI, ready to fly drones like the Mavic and Phantom. The drone won't come back and land at your feet because there isn't sensors to the bottom, etc., etc. But it'll allow me to do something called GPS rescue mode, and I can fill you guys in on that later. So that's a GPS chip. This is called a beeper. It's the Wi-Fi Finder 2 or Fi-Fly Finder 2. When the drone loses battery power, it will start beeping. Quietly at first for 40 seconds, and then louder, and then as the time goes on, it starts beeping less frequently to conserve battery power. It has a built-in 1-cell LiPo battery right here, which powers it. So even if your battery gets ejected from the drone during a crash, this will beep, so you can find it. I figured, better safe than sorry. It's not very expensive. Let's put that on as well. Okay, so I have to wire all this stuff on, and I will consult my wiring schematic once again. So I've got to attach the receiver, the beeper, and the GPS chip. And that's what I'm going to do now. The beeper is attached. Alright, now we got receiver and GPS. Okay, so this little guy was a challenge, I'm not gonna lie. But that's how that looks when it's done. Have I mentioned I recommend you get a very pointy tip for your soldering iron? The receiver is now on the flight controller, as well as the connection for the beeper, or the buzzer. Okay, so that's plugged in. Now let's see if we can make this work like this. Whew. Wow. No loose solder, so this should be okay. Dang. So this is what it looks like now. Alright, so since this flight controller is made for the DJI FPV system, it comes with this cable. And I just verified in the air unit manual that the colors or the orders of the pins, if you take a look at this, this is another cable that comes with it, it's color coded. This is essentially the same cable, but it just goes from the flight controller to the air unit, so I don't have to solder it. And I made sure that these red, black, white, power, ground, UART, RX, TX, all that stuff lines up with the manual of the flight controller, which I've got pulled up on an iPad right here. So that's good to go. So I can connect that from here to the air unit. And as you can see, I've got the buzzer hooked up, the receivers right here. Now I'm just going to figure out where to mount it all, and then button up the top here. Okay, a little update. I've got the flight controller on there again. I was using these yellow little grommets on the ESC at the bottom to try to vibration dampen it a little bit. And with the grommets on the ESC and the flight controller, the stack was too tall that I was going to have issues with this plug and this this plug here on the top plate. So I took this off, I took off the ESC, and I got rid of the grommets, and I put it back. Of the flight controller and the ESC, the flight controller is the more sensitive one because of the gyros and everything, so I decided to leave the grommets on the flight controller and go without on the ESC. Additionally, I added the buzzer here with the zip tie. The receiver, for now, I just wrapped in electrical tape. I've got this nice clear shrink wrap for it, but I want to test it first, make sure everything works right. Then I can decide if I want to mount it somewhere else. And then I've got the wires just electrical taped here, so it doesn't get caught in anything. But I can make that look prettier later. The GPS I'm going to put on top of the battery strap on the top, so it's up high and has a clear view of the sky. Alright guys, it's the moment of truth. I've got my smoke stopper here. Basically, this is a kind of a fuse, so that if I did short something out while soldering and plugging in and doing all that stuff, then in theory, I will at worst burn through this fuse and not ruin my electronics. If this light is solid green, that's good. If it's faded, blinking or off, that's bad, that means there's a short. Alright guys, here we go. Only 2 days of work if this is all busted and a bunch of money. Negative first. Okay. Solid green. I don't see anything smoking. Oh man. I hope everything works. Oh guys, check it out. Oh, what a relief. As you can see, I still have to mount a couple things. I gotta update the firmware on a bunch of stuff. I'll do that with the computer, but so far so good. Green light is on. Hallelujah. Okay, so I've got the flight controller hooked up to my computer, and I'm using the Beta Flight software and the BL Heli software to do a couple things. One, some of my motors were turning in the wrong direction. I fixed that. And also, the motors were wired to the wrong area. That's because my ESC I mounted 180 degrees opposite of how it should be, because I wanted the power leads at the front so I could wire the capacitor in the front. So that, of course, messed up which motor should be, and I fixed that in the software as well. Next, I'm going to check out the receiver, because I'm not using the DJI FPV air unit receiver. I'm using a Crossfire Receiver in hopes of even better range, and for that I need my radio. And for my radio, I went with the Jumper T16. Look at this thing. It's crazy. It's got a color screen. Watch this. Oh, I gotta install my antenna. You should always attach an antenna to every kind of transmitter before powering on. Okay, so watch this, guys.
Welcome to OpenTX.
It talks to you. Oh yeah. Alright guys, I've updated the air unit with the DJI Assistant app, and now we're gonna take out these goggles. Looks like there's some paperwork. Ooh, look at that. It looks kind of cyborg futuristic, but pretty freaking cool. Let's get the boring stuff out of the way. Wow. Pretty cool packaging design on the inside. There's little bumpers in the corners to protect the goggles. And those bumpers, I think, were resting here on this thing. So I've read that this standard or stock or OEM design doesn't really fit well to Western faces. So it'll be interesting to try. I've got to update the firmware on these guys, and once again we're not going to power anything on until we have the antennas installed, so I'm going to do that. And then there's no built-in battery on these. You have to supply your own LiPo, and I got a 4S LiPo to do that. Theoretically I think it works with a 2S as well, but that's just what I'm using. Alright, so I read that people were getting their power cables pulled out when they were moving around because the battery is on this relatively long lead, you know. I'm not sure if I'm going to mount the battery to the goggles at some point, but for now I'm using this zip tie trick to a little bit of strain relief, and then the cable won't get pulled out accidentally. Alright guys, the time has come, I think. It's time for the Maiden Test Flight. What I've done since the last time you guys saw this is I added some hot glue on these connections down here to protect them from this Velcro strap, because it kind of rubs on it when you pull it. That's kind of annoying. The GPS chip is now up here, so it's up nice and high. I used a lot of electrical tape. I need to make it look a little bit prettier, but I just want to see if this thing flies. Yeah, I've got the battery balanced pretty much over the center of the drone. Since we have the air unit way back here, the CG, or the center of gravity wants to be further back. And until I mount my GoPro, which will be additional weight in the front, I just moved the battery as far forward as I could. I'm hoping it won't rub on here. I added some grippy battery pads underneath to keep it from sliding, because just the Velcro I don't think would be enough. Yeah. Do I sound nervous? I'm nervous. So I'm going to get someone to help me film the Maiden Flight, I guess. Here goes nothing. Alright, so 2.5 days later, the build's complete. I haven't had anything to eat yet, so except for coffee, so I'm a little shaky, which is probably not the best thing for a Maiden Flight. I've got my fancy safety goggles, safety glasses, and I think it's ready to fly, so you guys can watch the maiden voyage, and hopefully I won't kill these Christmas deer. Alright, you ready? Okay, I'll start recording this one. Can you give me a loud clap? Okay. No, just one. For syncing the video.
What are you thinking about?
Okay, the beeper works. I'm in beginner mode.
have to give it a little bit of rear stick on the elevator to get it to hover flat. Okay, the voltage on the battery's fine. Holy cow. No. Okay, I'm coming back. That was nuts. Can't wait to try it with the goggles so I can actually see what it sees. Just trying to get it back down without dropping too quickly to get through the prop wash. You got it? I'm going to do another part acceleration, okay?
I can't follow that because it blurs it out with the black and white line.
Wow, that was like half throttle.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed that. You know how YouTube works. Give this video a like. Let me know in the comments down below what else you'd like to see. And yeah, I hope you guys have a good week. And can't wait to make some more cool videos in the future. Bye. Bye.